Hello, welcome to AR Highlights at AWE Asia 2023. My name is Stacy, and today I'm honored to be here with Alvin Wang Graylin from HTC.
Hello.
Alvin is the Global VP of Corporate Development, and he gave an amazing keynote earlier this morning, and so today we'll just have a conversation to go over the highlights and ask a little bit more in depth. But before we get into it, Alvin, would you mind giving a quick introduction of yourself and of your role at HTC?
Sure. So I'm Alvin. I've been in and out of the AI and XR industry for about 30 years. I first studied it back in the early 90s and have kind of watched it grow and develop. So it's nice to see both technologies maturing around the same time, and I'm very optimistic in terms of how it's going to help the society develop over the next decade.
Very cool. So let's get into your session then. Your session was titled From Deglobalization to Diglobalization, or Deglobalization. Could you define for our audience who maybe wasn't there what diglobalization is?
Yeah, so diglobalization or digglobalization, essentially it's the virtualization of our world. So we've been talking about deglobalization, which is essentially having the global economic system that we've developed over the last couple hundred years of having different countries do different types of production and work to create a higher value and productivity, where that supply chain is now being restructured in a way to be more nationalized, which I actually think is not necessarily the most efficient way for our world to operate. But so even if the physical world is becoming more deglobalized, I think the virtual world will actually reunify us and create a common infrastructure that ties everybody together, which is what will be the metaverse. Which is, the metaverse is really the next generation of the internet. The internet right now is a 2D focus, text and video and pictures. We're going to move to a more 3D version of that internet, and the internet today is a very global infrastructure that connects anybody in the world with anybody else. And we should have that same level of interconnectivity in this 3D internet. And AI will play a tremendous role in terms of being the underlying, power that fuels this 3D internet. And everything from content creation to interface to the monitoring regulation to translation, et cetera, all can happen because of the developments within AI. So that's going to help the world become smaller and more united on the virtual world, even though on the physical side we may become more and more separated. So that was kind of the theme of it. And I think the other thing is that I would like to see us also having maybe a more unified governance system, where right now we have over 200 countries in the world, and all with different models, with different governments, different people, and changing every few years because of elections or coups or whatever. That creates a lot of instability and inefficiencies. If we can start to allow AI to take a greater role in terms of the government and governance, maybe not immediately because I think it's not ready yet, but at some point when it becomes more mature, it can actually add a level of long-term thinking and less bias, the human bias that's out there and the human conflicts because of our kind of self motivation to help our party or ourselves or our family or whatever. There's just human nature that's very difficult to overcome. But with an AI-based leadership model, that should actually have greater information in terms of what's happening in this space and take into account all of the long-term ramifications of decisions to come up with the best recommendation. Now, maybe there needs to be some level of collaboration between a group of human leaders together with AI advisors to make the best decisions versus today, which often are party-driven or individual-driven, that probably doesn't make the optimal decision.
There was a lot of topics there, lots of things I'd like to dig into. First, you mentioned a lot about the need for regulation, about some risks. What do you see as being kind of the biggest challenges and frictions along this long process of deglobalization? And do you think that regulation and various mitigation factors are very capable of addressing those?
Yeah, so unfortunately, in the real world, things are never as black and white, right?
Right.
So whether or not the regulation can be perfect in terms of addressing these issues, it is something that we still need to do, and hopefully the positive impact outweighs the negative, and even there will probably be negative impacts of regulation as well. People always are afraid that having regulation will slow down innovation, but in the case of AI and in the case of the metaverse, I think some level of regulation would be beneficial to society, partly because the more we are dependent on technology, if it is not regulated, the negative ramification can be very great. The other thing is with AI, as we talked about during the talk, it's going to go through multiple phases, and in the middle phase is when it's the most dangerous. And we're kind of, I think, in the early phase, but we're not far away because of the speed of advancement of this technology. Within the next few years, we're going to get to that middle phase, and that middle phase will be a very powerful, very smart technology that does not yet know what's right and wrong, and can be misguided by bad actors. And unfortunately, even whether or not AI is evil, I actually am on the side that AI, I don't think will be evil. The smarter the AI, the more benevolent I think it will be. But we do know that there are evil people out there, and there are people who will misuse that for their own good. And unfortunately, if we don't regulate it to either prevent or limit the downside of these bad actors, we're going to potentially face some very dire results. And it doesn't take a lot of people or a lot of money like you would with nuclear technology, right? Like to make a nuclear bomb, there's a lot of people that need to be involved, and very limited resources, and it's very easy to detect. Whereas with AI, all you really need is a GPU or a few GPU servers, and you can do a lot of the training or the refinements or the inference. And if they're using it to make chemical weapons or bioweapons, it can be fairly inexpensive to do, but the impact can be very large, right? Or if you're going to use it to create a misinformation campaign or affect a certain election in a country, those kind of things are misuses of this technology. And as more and more people spend more time in immersive experiences, we also know that immersive environments are highly influential in terms of your opinions and your values and your decision making, and sometimes it's much easier to manipulate people inside those environments. So we need to make sure that there are regulation also in terms of how advertising or influence can be done inside virtual environments, and how much transparency there is of what's real and what's virtual, of how your data is being used by AI, of how your privacy is being shared. So there's a lot of concerns in terms of how this technology then embeds itself into our daily lives. But again, I don't think there's a panacea. It's not going to solve everything.
Right.
But if we don't do it, then the chance of it going bad is actually quite high.
Right. There's lots of ways where it sounds like AI, in conjunction with the metaverse, has a lot of pressing issues for society. On the flip side, though, are there actually also ways in which the metaverse and various XR things can actually help solve some of these issues that we see with AI?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think that the two technologies are super complementary and create a symbiotic mode. And I think in my talk, I mentioned AI is going to enable and solve a lot of the biggest issues with XR adoption, particularly with content creation.
Right.
I mean, content creation, I actually think the lack of quality content and the lack of quantity of useful use cases is the main reason why XR has not been adopted as widely as people had hoped. I remember when I was studying this 30-something years ago, I thought within 10 years everybody will be using XR for education, for medical, for all communication, etc. But 30 years later, we're just starting to do that. But what I think will happen is that if we can get the content to be the same scale and breadth and quality of content that we have in 2D, there's so much reason for people to have a device on their head versus something on the screen versus having something in their pocket. And now that we have technology where the devices are being smaller and lighter, and they're able to do both AR and VR on the same device, I think that's going to really significantly change our relationship with this technology. In the past, it was a big box on your head and it's heavy and it's uncomfortable and the battery doesn't last very long, etc. Now that we have these devices that are going to be much more comfortable, and if content is rich, there's no reason not to use that. And immersive experiences are just going to be so much, from an entertainment perspective, so much more engaging. From an educational perspective, so much more effective. And from a collaboration, communication perspective, you feel like you're there, right? So maybe in a few years, instead of doing this interview face to face, we could do it in XR. And I've done multiple interviews in XR, and I actually feel like when I'm in the middle of that discussion, I don't feel like this person is remote or is far away. I feel like this person is right next to me because I have this positional sense. And I can see that the nonverbal gestures and movement, I hear the sound instantly. And that allows us to create a personal relationship as if you were face to face. And actually from a, how does that help the world? It helps us in terms of, every flight, it saves how many, tons of carbon in the air. Every time we get in the car, we waste energy. Every time we buy something and we only use it once. So there's ways where we can, instead of having a giant house, if we can have a giant house in XR, but you live in a small apartment, that's probably good for the environment, right? And AI, I think, will also solve a lot of issues. XR will also solve a lot of issues for AI, in the sense of, with AI, my biggest concern right now is two. One is the misuse and misinformation side, which we talked about earlier. But the other side is the job displacement problem. And we're going to see 30, 40, 50% of jobs being displaced by AI, particularly in the white-collar areas. And people identify so much of their work and their value and their identity with their job today and their title and the company and so forth. Once you have a large portion of your society become, in a very short amount of time, become jobless, how is that going to change their self-perception and their self-value? So there's going to be a potential mental health crisis that's going to come up. But if we can allow them to then express themselves and do content creation or making virtual worlds or meeting new people from around the world or doing virtual travel, those kind of things where allow them to become a pure artist instead of just a white collar worker. That actually maybe creates more emotional satisfaction than their daily jobs today. And if they're successful in what they're doing, they actually can maybe even make money from it. So it could be it could supplement the lack of income. Although still, I think there is a real need for governments around the world to work on a UBI program, because without a UBI program, the current society is not able to absorb these people quickly. You're going to have instability in society. So it's something that needs to be seriously looked at around the world, and to have a common, hopefully a common UBI program across all the countries. Another benefit I think for AI is right now one of the biggest issues people talk about is AI alignment. Can we align AI when it becomes AGI? And if we can leverage the metaverse as a playground or a sandbox for these AI systems to go and play around as if they were in the real world. And since these AIs may not know that they are in a virtual world, they will behave naturally. And you can see, is there danger? Is there something dangerous about them when we set them free in the real world? Right? Because a lot of people are saying, how do you know they're not going to be evil? And how do you know, how are they going to really behave? Will they, enslave all people? Let's see how they really act in a virtual world when we have a lot of these AIs interacting with each other, and with maybe even some virtual humans in a air-gapped sandbox type model. So it's a safe playground for them to speed up time and for us to experiment and say, hey, what type of alignment model, what type of rules or objective functions should we give these AIs to create a safe, maturing AI? Like I said, I think a fully mature AI, I actually think will be very benevolent and will be very compassionate, and at the same time being very rational and knowing. But it's that middle ground. So when it's going through the middle ground, how do we make sure it doesn't get misguided by the wrong people? and misguided, maybe even by unintentional consequences of rules that we put in, right? So I think that those are a few ways where the metaverse can actually help AI as well to solve some of these intermediate issues.
So you're just talking about kind of the need for this experimentation and how the metaverse can provide the sandbox and playground. How does the concept of open versus closed AI also play into that idea of kind of experimenting and testing all the tech?
Yeah, I think there's there's right now two kind of major camps. There's the very a closed camp that says, hey, we're going to make this and we're going to make it safe ourselves and we're not going to share it. And because we're not sharing it, it'll be safer. And then there's the other camp who says, if you don't share, then how do we know that you're not putting in bad things? And the best way to defense this is to let everybody have it. So maybe there's multiple AIs that can help each other and they'll fight against each other so that we don't have one winner or one kind of super AI that rules everybody, right? In some ways, I think there is logic on both camps. And the current model is that the frontier models, the biggest, most expensive, most valuable advanced models are actually closed right now. Even though we have companies called OpenAI, they're actually the most closed probably of the various AI providers or platforms. So Meta actually has a relatively open platform, but they may or may not be sharing it for purely altruistic reasons. And then there's a few smaller camps. So I think there's definitely value in terms of more openness because you can see what's underneath the hood, and people can help you find bugs. I spent many years in the cybersecurity industry, and when you can see the code of something, and everybody's helping watch it, they can find problems that maybe the developer cannot find. And I think the open source industry has been, or community has been actually very productive across many types of development, and it's been successful. So I think there should be more openness and more sharing. And in fact, rather than what's happening today is becoming a race condition of essentially Google versus OpenAI, Microsoft. And two people are racing as quickly as possible to get to this AGI or ASI. Unfortunately, when I hear interviews with some of the leaders of these companies and they say, hey, when they're asked, how can we align AI? And their answer is, oh, we can align AI because we're just going to ask AI how to align themselves. That somehow does not provide us a sense of security for me, because it feels like you're asking the fox, how should I guard you from yourself to eat all the hens? It feels wrong. And particularly when everybody's moving so quickly in this race, that the safeguards are becoming less and less, not more and more. And as we get closer to an AGI system, we should be more careful. So I would actually advocate slowing down, not stopping or not blowing up, data centers and stuff. But I think slowing down and really making sure we release things very carefully and share learnings across companies. So rather than having Apple or having Google and OpenAI and Meta and Tencent and Baidu all trying to fight to see who can get there first, they probably should find a way to share and share information so that they can get there together, and the winner becomes the humanity versus one single company. And right now, I think most of these companies are trying to be the winner so that it's a winner-take-all type model. And so the future of humanity should not be a winner-take-all type of a race.
Yes, very much agreed on that point. So we've talked a lot about kind of the metaverse with AI, but I'm really curious also about how the metaverse will interact with other kind of newer types of tech, particularly I believe you mentioned gene tech and clean tech. How do you think that the metaverse will interact with and also further develop these new fields?
In the talk I focus mostly on AI and metaverse, but I think these two other technologies, clean tech and gene tech, are things that are maturing around the same time. And gene tech, essentially is going to essentially re-engineer our bodies and allow us to live healthier and live longer. And in fact, when you live healthy and longer, it it goes to the sense of what really matters to you anymore. And when you can live 100 years, or 80 years, whatever the average is right now, you want to leave your legacy. You want to do things quickly. You want to gather wealth and blah blah blah. But a lot of people want to have a lot of kids so that they can have the next generation and so forth. But I think once you start to live longer and healthier, you can have children later. You maybe have less children, because people in countries that are less developed, people have more children because they're worried that their children may not survive. Right, and they won't be able to pass on their genes, so which is natural. But what we find is that the more mature a country is, and including Singapore, Japan, and Korea, the birth rates are going down and down. And China is the same. I think last year was the first year China actually had a negative population growth. And so we need to see how these things come together. And when you live longer, I think you then start having a longer horizon in terms of decision making, and XR can play a really good role because it allows you to do a lot of things that you may not have been able to do. If you've already traveled to most of the countries in the world, what else would you want to do? You may want to travel back in time, or you want to travel to another dimension, or to another size. You want to be the size of a cell and discover how it flow in the body. I mean, there's things like that are just would be super exciting experiences, or to put yourself into the body of another animal, and feel what it's like to be that. Right? A lot of things that would not be possible in the real world, and those kind of experiences can be had when you have more time and when you have more technology, and it can also be more egalitarian, because anybody with a device, that a few $100 device, can have that experience. Whereas today, all of the unique experiences are only being had by the top 1%, who can fly around and pay for all these different types of experiences. When you virtualize those experiences, people can have that same satisfaction and growth without necessarily spending a lot of resources. The clean energy side, I actually think that AI will and kind of fusion, hopefully, one of the first things hopefully it will help us do is to solve the fusion problem. And if we can do that, we can actually, even without AI, we've been able to get some breakthroughs in the last year, but still very small scale. How do we scale that to city scale or world scale, so that we can use clean fusion to be able to power everything. And then when we do that, that can then essentially increase our productivity by orders of magnitude, which then allows UBI to be done without any strain on society. Right? A lot of people are saying, oh, UBI is just like socialism. We should avoid that because socialism is bad. The reality is that socialism, as it was practiced before in a scarcity focused world, is hard to execute. But in an abundant world, in a post-scarcity society, a socialist model may actually be the most efficient model, because why do we, capitalism works when you're fighting to see what's the best use of resources in a limited world. And then you're using it to create competition. But if we can have anything we want, we can make anything we want, and it's essentially free, why do we care so much about the maximizing profit? And the competition, the stress that it creates on society, and the inequality it creates of the rich and haves and the have-nots, right? Because when you have capitalism, the people who are the successful capitalists can be the 100 billionaires, and then you have one or two individuals right now that are worth more than the 50% of the population of the world, right? That's very, very unequal, and it's actually very unhealthy and unsustainable. Because, as we all know, in philosophy, when you have inequality, you will have revolt and revolution, which creates this disruption to society. Right? So I think the combination of these technologies all coming together will help us realize this post-scarcity world. And kind of getting to where, if you watch or read sci-fi, kind of like Star Trek, we would get to a Star Trek-like society where the purpose is not to work. The purpose is to go explore and share and see the rest of the galaxy or the rest of the universe, and to spread intelligence and to and the people work because they want to work, not because they have to work so that they can pay the bills, right? So we need to. I know it sounds very idealistic, and what I'm saying won't happen instantly. It may take decades, but if we manage what happens well the next 5 to 10 years and get to that AGI level or ASI level intelligence and harness it to have a common goal with us. What I'm describing would actually be a natural consequence of that activity. So what we do as a society, what we do as a company or as leaders of companies or leaders of countries will have dramatic and long-term ramifications in terms of how our society and how humanity as a whole will develop over the next millennia.
That does sound a little bit futuristic, but also we're getting there. How is what HTC doing kind of building towards this kind of 5 to 10 year kind of vision that you've mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason I'm at HTC is I feel like the HTC philosophy of how technology and society work together is very aligned to what I'm describing. And we from the beginning, we were always about creating an open ecosystem. We invested in startups, 8-9 years ago, trying to fund the companies that are the fundamental pieces of helping create a metaverse or a VR ecosystem or XR ecosystem. Our app store is open to all of the different hardware vendors. We had this Live Wave program where we were sharing technology. Whenever we had new technology, we would share it with our competitors and allow them so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. We also worked with the Web3 community to take some of that technology to allow for openness and sharing of transactions and information across worlds. Right now, we have this thing called the Viverse platform, which is a open metaverse system that works for consumers and a B2B platform to allow any device, not just our own devices, not just XR devices, but also phones, tablets, PCs, to all be able to access 3D worlds so that no matter if you're in a developing country or a very wealthy country, and no matter where your wealth class is, you will not be left out of this metaverse revolution where people move from a 2D world to a 3D computing world, right? And in the past, because of the lack of access or the lack of education or lack of resources, it created greater and greater disparity between the wealthy nations and the developing nations, and between the wealthy people within each country. But if we can make this fully accessible to everybody, anybody can get a high quality education. Anybody can get a job anywhere in the world by putting on a headset. It helps equalize people. And I think those are the kind of goals that we've been focused on trying to solve. And that's also what motivates me as an individual. In fact, a lot of what I've been saying today is something that I've been writing a book for the last year and a half, which will come out in about next 6 months.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, and the reason I'm writing that book is because I feel like we're at a juncture in society where we need to be doing the right things, because those decisions have such long-term impact and such global scale impact. In fact, maybe galaxy scale impact if we see the long-term progression of this. If we do everything right, and we start having a fully abundant society, we will then be able to develop interstellar travel and then spread the intelligence that we have on this planet to the rest of the universe. There's 100 million something livable planets in our galaxy and 100 billion galaxies in the universe. There's a lot of potential for what we have uniquely developed so far. At least group of people who an animal or a being that has developed this, to then spread it out to other parts of the world or other parts of the universe. So I'm actually, I think we need to be very proud of ourselves of having brought this species to where we are and having brought the planet to where we are. But we also need to be very responsible and aware that we also have the power to extinguish what we've created. And if we see that as both a privilege and as a responsibility that, having had this, if we don't do something, the universe may never have complex intelligence again. So we need to see that as a responsibility that we take seriously and work together to achieve that greater goal.
Well, I usually ask at the end of my interview what you hope that the biggest takeaway for attendees here at AWE are, but I feel like you just answered that tenfold. So thank you so much. This has been a very insightful conversation. We've talked a lot about the future and about kind of what the future of natural UI UX and kind of what the future of the metaverse looks like, but really that's what AWE Asia is for. The future really is really in the fold and really we're getting there right now. And so thank you so much for this conversation.
Hey, thank you, Stacey.
And this has been AR Highlights with AWE Asia 2023.